He thought he could have two women at the same time and that neither of us would ever compare notes. He was wrong. The moment I discovered the truth, I didn't scream. I didn't throw his phone across the room. I crawled back into bed beside him, waited until he was comfortable, and quietly made sure his new girlfriend learned exactly who she was dealing with. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who thought you'd never find out, hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and stay until the end, because this is one of those revenge stories where the person who thought they had everything suddenly realizes they have absolutely nothing. Years ago, I was 20 years old, going to college to become a nurse, raising two little children, and trying desperately to keep my relationship together. Their father was 26. We'd been together for 6 years, which meant that by the time I was 20, we'd already shared most of our adult lives together. We had a 1-year-old child, and our second son had been born only 3 months earlier. It wasn't exactly an easy time. I was exhausted from school, motherhood, and everything that came with having a newborn. He worked the night shift as a janitor at a nursing home. The arrangement was difficult, but I believed we were a team. During the day, I'd be at college. At night, he'd go to work. We were both tired. We were both stretched thin. But I thought we were building something together. Then there was the woman from his workplace. At first, I didn't think much of her. I'd met her several times when I brought him lunch. We talked. We laughed. I got to know her. In my mind, she was just another woman he worked with. Eventually, I considered her a friend. That detail would become important later. You see, my boyfriend was supposedly working nights waxing floors at the nursing home. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And because he worked while everyone else was sleeping, I didn't question the hours. Until one night, my cousin happened to see something she wasn't supposed to see. She ran into him at a local bar with that woman. And suddenly, the story about waxing floors didn't make quite as much sense. When my cousin told me, I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. I confronted him. The argument was explosive. There were accusations, excuses, raised voices, tears. He insisted they were just friends. He told me nothing inappropriate was happening. I remember hearing some version of, "You're making this into something it isn't." And then came the promises. It wouldn't happen again. He'd be more careful. Nothing was going on. Eventually, the fight ended the way these things often do when you're exhausted and still desperately want to believe the person you love. I gave him another chance. A month later, things still weren't right. The fighting had become constant. Every little disagreement seemed to turn into another argument about trust, responsibility, or where he was going. Then, one day, he sat me down and gave me the talk. He said we should separate. Not dramatically, not with screaming. He wanted to keep things amicable. He said we'd been fighting too much and that we should stay friends for the sake of the children. At the time, I thought maybe this was the beginning of the end. But I still wanted to be decent about it, so I agreed. There was just one little problem. The house was mine. I was the one paying the bills, using grants and scholarships from college to keep everything running. The car he drove, mine too. He didn't have a place lined up. So despite everything, I decided to be generous. I told him he could stay until he figured things out. He could still use my car to get to work. I continued feeding him. I continued taking care of the children. I continued making sure there was a roof over his head. Basically, even after he told me we should separate, I was still making his life easier. And then something strange happened. He became affectionate again. The arguments seemed to disappear. He started acting like the old version of himself, the man I'd spent 6 years loving. He'd be sweet. He'd cuddle up beside me. He'd act as though we were still a couple. And because we were technically just friends, I tried not to overthink it. But our physical relationship continued too. That should have been a warning. Instead, I think part of me wanted to believe that maybe we were finding our way back to each other. Maybe the separation was temporary. Maybe the stress had simply gotten between us. Maybe there was still something worth saving. Then one morning, everything changed. I was feeding our 3-month-old son. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet you get early in the morning when the children are awake, but the rest of the world hasn't started moving yet. He was still asleep. Then his phone went off. A notification. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. I know what people say. Don't look through someone's phone if you're not prepared for what you might find. But sometimes, the truth has a way of putting itself directly in front of you. I looked, and within moments, my stomach dropped. The woman from the nursing home, the woman I had met, the woman I thought was my friend, the woman he'd supposedly only been friends with. They weren't just friends. They'd been carrying on a relationship. And according to what I was seeing, it hadn't started after our separation. It had been happening while he was still with me, while I was pregnant, while I was taking care of our children, while I was going to school, while I was bringing him lunches, while I was paying the bills. And the worst part? He had apparently been continuing both relationships at the same time. My hands went cold. I could hear my baby breathing. The phone was still in my hand. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. I could have woken him up. I could have started screaming. I could have packed my own things and left. But then a different thought entered my mind. Why should I be the one leaving? This was my house, my car, my life. He had spent months making choices that benefited him while assuming I'd absorb the consequences. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I climbed back into bed beside him. He was still asleep. He curled toward me like he always did, completely unaware that I knew everything. For a moment, I just watched the same man I'd spent 6 years with, the father of my children, the man I'd sacrificed for. And now I knew that while I had been trying to hold our family together, he had been quietly building another relationship behind my back. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to give him the dramatic confrontation he expected. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. I took the evidence from his phone and sent it to the other woman, along with a message explaining exactly what had been happening. No vague accusations, no guessing, no emotional rant, just the facts. I wanted her to know that she wasn't getting the honest, available man she thought she was getting. She was getting someone who had been telling 2 different stories to 2 different women. And then came the most satisfying part. I got dressed. I started packing his belongings. Piece by piece. I went through the house and gathered his things into boxes. The clothes, the personal items, everything that belonged to him. The same house where I'd spent months allowing him to stay. The same house where I'd continued feeding him. The same house where he'd apparently felt comfortable maintaining 2 relationships. By the time he woke up, his life was sitting in boxes. Outside, then his phone started going crazy. Ping, 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 message after message. I didn't need to say anything. The phone was telling the story for me. A few hours after he'd gone to sleep, he finally reached for it. He started making a call, and that's when I walked into the room. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me, and I watched the color drain from his face. It was almost unbelievable. This man who had spent months juggling excuses suddenly couldn't find a single one. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't spin it. He couldn't tell me I was imagining things. Because I'd already spoken to her, I looked at him and told him exactly what had happened. I told him about the conversation we'd had. I told him that she now knew everything. And I showed him the evidence. For once, he had nothing to say. Then he looked outside. His belongings were waiting for him, boxed up, ready to go. I told him, "You don't live here anymore." And suddenly, the confident man who had apparently thought he could maintain 2 relationships became completely helpless. His first question wasn't an apology. It wasn't, "How could I do this to you?" It wasn't even, "Are you okay?" It was, "Where am I supposed to go?" I remember thinking about that question. Where was he supposed to go? That wasn't my problem anymore. He had made his choice, so I told him exactly where he could go. I told him he should call his girlfriend and ask her to come get him. Maybe she could give him a place to stay. Maybe she could take care of him now. But there was one thing I made very clear. He wasn't taking my car. For months, I'd been carrying the responsibilities he'd avoided. I had given him a place to live. I had fed him. I had let him use my vehicle. I had even been willing to remain civil after he broke our relationship. And he'd repaid me by secretly maintaining another relationship behind my back. So I stopped making his problems my problems. I shut the door. And that was it. 6 years. Over, not because I suddenly stopped caring. Not because the betrayal didn't hurt. It hurt more than I could explain. I'd given that man my time, my trust, my heart, my body, my sanity. I'd supported him while raising 2 children and going to school. And somehow, he still believed he was entitled to both women. What made the situation even more insulting was that I had been willing to let him stay. I had been willing to make the separation peaceful. I had been willing to let him keep using my car and eating food I paid for while he figured out his next move. I wasn't demanding revenge. I wasn't trying to destroy his life. I was simply trying to be decent. He was the one who decided that wasn't enough. He wanted everything. So I gave him exactly what he'd earned. Nothing, looking back. Was it petty? Absolutely. Sending the evidence to the other woman wasn't exactly the most mature thing I could have done. But after everything that had happened, there was something deeply satisfying about watching his carefully constructed double life collapse in a matter of minutes. He had spent months controlling what each woman knew. He thought he could keep us separated. He thought he could tell one story to me and another story to her. But the moment the two stories collided, the entire illusion fell apart. And that's the thing about betrayal. The person doing it often believes they're in control because they control the information. They decide what you know. They decide what you don't know. They decide which version of themselves you get to see. But once the truth comes out, that control disappears. And suddenly, the person who thought they were manipulating everyone else is standing there with nowhere left to hide. I didn't get revenge by becoming like him. I got revenge by taking back what was already mine. My home, my car, my peace, my ability to decide who deserved access to my life. And maybe that's the most satisfying part of the whole story. He wanted two women. Instead, he lost both. He wanted somewhere to live. He lost the house. He wanted transportation. He lost the car. He wanted to keep me around while pursuing someone else. Instead, he walked out the door with his belongings packed in boxes. Sometimes justice doesn't require a complicated plan. Sometimes you just have to stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. And that's exactly what I did. So, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who thought you'd never discover the truth, remember this. You don't have to destroy someone to reclaim your power. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply closing the door and refusing to carry their problems anymore. And if you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of karma or revenge you've ever witnessed? Because sometimes the best endings aren't about getting even. They're about finally getting free.